It seems like the season just got underway, and we're about 2 or 3 games here from the end of the regular season in Texas high school football. With Ryan Osborne, I'm Travis Brown from DFWVarsity.com, and this is the High School Huddle. Let's start off first with the epic moment of the week, and that had to be the game that many people were looking forward to. That was that South Lake Carroll versus Euless Trinity game where Carroll won 10-6 over Euless Trinity, which was really surprising.
Yeah, Trinity was able to come out and have that ball control offense, that run-heavy offense. They ran, I believe, 7 or 8 times on their first drive. Only had 1 pass. They only ended up getting a field goal, but they were able to move the ball either to the edge with Jerron Wilson on those sweep plays they like to run, and then eventually between the tackles they established a running game. But they couldn't connect, they couldn't convert in the red zone, and Carroll is out of sync as they looked for most of that game. They had 2 drives, one at the end of the first half. They went about 75 yards to set up a field goal right as the half expired, and then at the end, with little Jordan Humphrey having the 1-yard touchdown run, the go-ahead touchdown run, and then they just stopped Trinity at the end. Trinity literally did run out of time. They were about to run a 4th and goal play from the 9. Clock runs out, and it was as close as expected. Of course, it wasn't the 42-38 game that we saw last year at AT&T Stadium, but I'm not too surprised because I think that's how Trinity probably game planned it, going on the road, wanting to keep control of the ball and run that clock out. Not really run the clock out, but just have control of the clock, and that's what they did for a majority of the game.
I was a little bit surprised by the score with 2 teams that combined for 70 points per game so far this year to be a 10-6 outcome. The other thing I was surprised about is, and this is a little bit relative, but how well little Jordan Humphrey was able to run the ball through the middle against a stout Trinity defensive front. I mean, it's relative because he got under 100 yards rushing, which is not typically his MO for the year, but against that kind of defense, to get the kind of yards and get the kind of clutch yards that he got, it was pretty impressive performance.
Yeah.
So let's move on to this next week's games, and Trinity moves right on to another tough challenge in Coppell in that District of Doom.
This game is key because this game is actually even more important than the Carroll game, because you knew Carroll was going to go Division II, and Coppell and Trinity are both going to go Division I. But this game is to avoid a very tough, most likely the loser of this game, if DeSoto goes Division I, will get DeSoto in the first round. So this is a huge game. If either of these teams want to make a playoff run, which they do, which they're accustomed to doing, especially Trinity, they have to win this game to avoid a potential first-round matchup with DeSoto, which is also crazy that there's that many big-time matchups in the first round this year, but that's the way Region 1 is set up in DFW. But and I guess getting down to the X's and O's of it, it's going to be power football. It's going to be who can establish something between the tackles. I would like to see a little bit more from Trinity between the tackles, as much as big as they are. They, like you mentioned, they kind of struggle between the tackles against Carroll, but I think that those jet sweeps that they run with Jerron Wilson and the quarterback Tyler Nate being able to throw a little bit more, I think Trinity wins very close one at home.
Yeah, this is the game. Last week's game, you might have expected a little bit more of fireworks on offense. This is the game that everyone should expect to be like that Carroll Trinity game was last week, because it's 2 teams that run the ball like Trinity runs the ball. It's just who will be more effective, who can get those tough yards, and then maybe who can break out a 1 or 2 big plays. But yeah, I have Trinity as being a little bit stronger in this one, and especially coming off, they'll make the adjustments and with that kind of coaching staff and do what they need to do to move past that loss last week, because they're not that team that's accustomed to losing very much, and especially not losing in streaks. Moving on, we have a big undefeated matchup in Fort Worth with Fort Worth Arlington Heights and Fort Worth South Hills.
These teams match up very well. They both have great skill position players. They're both relatively the same when it comes to size on the offensive and defensive line. I think South Hills has a little bit more playmakers. Trayson Wallace has, I believe, 40 combined touchdowns this year, which is just insane through 7 games. And they're the highest scoring team in the state. And neither team has been tested much competition-wise, so it's kind of hard to get a gauge. But I think South Hills is going to pull this one out because I don't see Arlington Heights slowing this offense down. Arlington Heights may put up some points, but South Hills, I think they're going to roll on here.
Right. I mean, you have a team, and really what's kind of underrated about Heights is that defense. They're only allowing 10 points per game to opponents this season. And then on the other hand, you have South Hills, who is averaging 538 yards per game. Got Trayson Wallace, who's throwing for 1,452 yards, 25 touchdowns. It's an Art Briles offense. it might be a little bit kind of like that Baylor TCU game. It's a high-powered offense against a pretty strong defense so far. I think that'll be a very exciting one to watch. I'll go with the defense on that one. I like Arlington Heights in this one.
Okay.
And then finally, we have a battle for fourth place, probably in a district, that last playoff spot between two teams that most people would have expected to have been in the playoffs when the season started. That's Keller Fossil Ridge versus Keller Central.
Fossil Ridge, I thought they were going to challenge Denton Geyer for the district title, and that's out of the window. But I think they still have a chance to pick themselves up after a couple tough weeks, get back on the winning track. Something's not right there, at least the last 2 weeks. I mean, they played good teams in Ryan and Geyer, but they really did not play well in either of those games. I think they beat Central, get back on the right path. They lost to Central last year in a very close game in which Central got them out of their rhythm. I don't think that happens this year. I think Ridge gets the win. Fossil
Ridge is surprisingly more one-dimensional than I think any of us thought. And if you can key on and stop Keyshawn Mitchell, that is the key to taking down Fossil Ridge. I think if Central can do that this week, they'll be able to shut down Fossil Ridge just like the last two teams have. But I think Fossil Ridge bounces back, and I think he's a very strong player and won't allow that to happen, nor will the offensive line and everyone around him. So I have Ridge that one in a very close one, but I wouldn't be surprised if Central got the job done in that one as well. All right, no huddle, real fast. We have a huge slate of games this week, so we're going to go through a lot of them. First, Cedar Hill at DeSoto.
DeSoto.
I'm going to have DeSoto in that one. Arlington Bowie versus Arlington.
Bowie.
Bowie in that one as well. Carroll versus Heritage.
Carroll.
I have Carroll in that one too. Mansfield versus South Grand Prairie.
South Grand Prairie.
I'm going to go with Mansfield in that one. Birdville versus Fort Worth Dunbar.
Dunbar.
I'm going to go with Birdville in that one. Mansfield Summit versus Lancaster.
Summit.
I'm going to go with Lancaster. Keller versus Denton Ryan.
I'll go with Denton Ryan.
I'll go with Denton Ryan in that one as well. Azle versus Denton.
I'll go with Denton.
I'm going to go with Azle in that one. And Fort Worth Nolan versus Plano Prestonwood.
Nolan, just because they've won the last 13 state championships or something like that.
I'm going to go with really Nolan in that one.
Last four.
Great offensive line. I'm going to go with Nolan in that one. Well, thanks for joining this week. Go out and catch one of these great games this week. Go to dfwvarsity.com. Check that for all the best recaps and stats, and we'll see you next week on the High School Huddle.